Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'd also like to thank our sponsor for this session, DXD Technology. Our next speaker will be talking to us about how to control SaaS IT spend with effective contract negotiation. And this is important to ag organizations because reducing licensing costs will free up funds to spend on strategic initiatives and innovation. Dan Kelly brings 13 years experience in advanced negotiation and IT strategic sourcing to us today. Dan started his career with the FBI, and his experience includes work across many industries, including ag. In 2015, Dan founded the Negotiator Guru, and in 2019, he launched the State of the CIO podcast. We are very happy to have him with us today, so please welcome the Negotiator Guru, Dan Kelly.
Hey, Leslie, thanks for the introduction. Hey, everybody, Dan Kelly here. Great to be with you today over Zoom. I wish it was in person, but we all know why it's not, so we'll have to make that up next year over happy hours or the such. So hope all is well wherever you are, and good morning, good evening, good night, good afternoon, all that jazz. So let's, I want to do a quick reminder. There's a quick poll on the website where you're watching this video. The questions are directed around Salesforce as one of the primary SaaS suppliers that we're going to talk about specifically in this session. So it would be really helpful if you could go and fill out that poll. Just 3 questions, I think, and then we'll review the results in just a little bit. So that's me. Just a quick introduction to build on what Leslie said. I personally have worked in just about every industry, and also public and private sectors. Recruited out of college in the FBI, spent 5 years in the Bureau. Learned that the government wasn't for me. I loved the FBI, hated working for the government for obvious reasons. I believe in this pay-for-performance type of structure. And so what I found out very quickly is that I was a better candidate for the private sector. Actually got recruited out of the FBI into Cargill, of all places. Now, I don't come from a farming background, which is actually why I enjoy the ag space so much and still do today, because I didn't grow up with it. So it was a new learning opportunity for me. And then hopped around different companies, got moved to different places. And so I've lived all around the world. And quite frankly, I found out that I just don't like having a boss. And so I said, maybe I should try the consulting thing out. And one thing led to another, and TNG was born. And so now, we call it TNG for short, but now the Negotiator Guru is on every continent except Antarctica, if you will. I guess we could service there, but we haven't before. As well as we've got 35 people that work on our deals. And so we specifically specialize in IT contract negotiation. So we're IT strategic sourcing experts. The team is not only made up of sourcing experts, but also legal experts and a few others from a technical side as well. So actual technical architects to make sure we don't break anything when we tell our clients how to optimize their spend, not only just from a negotiation, but from an architectural perspective as well. So that's a little bit about me. And I want to just look at the survey results coming in here, just to give a quick overview. So it looks like about 80% of you are not Salesforce customers, but 80% have very little experience, and very few of you need a SELA agreement. So this all makes sense to me. It just helps me get a gauge quickly of who's watching, who's listening, and all that stuff. Let's hop into the next slide real quick. And actually, before I do that, let me just say real quick, I've done this presentation a whole bunch of times around the world, and by far what people have indicated to me is they get the most value usually out of Q&A. So I want to make sure there's ample time for Q&A. Ask me anything you'd like. I'm a very open book, as people that know me could tell you. So I'm gonna hop to the next slide here. So this is the learning objectives for our quick session today. You know, the first objective is understanding the SaaS selling machine. And SaaS stands for software as a service, right? Your big names, Salesforce, Microsoft, Oracle, etc. These all should sound pretty familiar to you. We're gonna talk about two specifically, Salesforce and Microsoft, but we're really gonna hone in on Salesforce. And the reason for that is because our firm is currently and became the market leader specifically negotiating Salesforce deals. And so we really understand what's happening underneath the hood. But it's important to understand how Salesforce developed, and it developed from companies like Microsoft and Oracle, specifically their sales tactics. So you can use what you're going to learn today in any SaaS contract negotiation. All right. So we're going to understand the machine, if you will, as I call it. We're going to talk about the roles and responsibilities of your sales team within active negotiations, how to understand and leverage the business desk. Some people probably don't know what the business desk is, and I'll explain that. It's important that everyone understands what's happening on the other side of the table, if you will, so you have a fighting chance against these tactics, okay? And then specifically, how to best prepare for and counter the divide and conquer tactic. People mostly have heard of this divide and conquer tactic. If you haven't in the professional life, if you have kids, it's what kids do every day, and they're the best at it, especially any 10 or younger. I have a 6-year-old, and he teaches me something about this tactic nearly every day. And then some negotiation opportunities specifically for new versus existing customers with whatever agreement you're negotiating at the time. It's important to understand before we get too far into it here that most people have taken a negotiation course before, right? And so what we're going to be talking about today has this understanding that you have that basic knowledge of negotiation, right? The ultimate outcome of a win-win resolution, et cetera. It's important to understand that software negotiations are very different than your typical commercial negotiation. And the reason for that is twofold, okay? One is that the software is a sunk cost, okay? There's very little actual cost for the supplier of the software to push it to you, right? If nothing, other than hosting costs, right? There's very, very little costs to push the software to you. Whereas it'd be very different in let's call it a labor arbitrage play where they're making a percentage on top of a head per hour, right? This is not that environment. And so you have to understand that the profit margin on a sale basis is radical, well into the 90% for almost every software originator, or otherwise known as licensor, okay? And so you have to know that you aren't harming the software vendor when you're negotiating a 20 to 30 to 50% reduction on their offer to you, okay? So that's the first and foremost. The second thing is the sales teams are specifically trained, and we're going to talk about this in our next slide here. I'll flip to it quickly. But the sales team is specifically trained how to divide and conquer your internal organization so that they learn more about your organization than you do. And this is especially the case for large enterprise customers. And when I say that, I call it people that have annual revenue 5 billion up, we'll say, okay? Really 10 billion up takes it to a whole new level, right? And so when we talk about software negotiations versus commercial negotiations, software, there's very little cost to the software vendor, and they are literally trained how to extract the most revenue possible from your organization with arguably not that much capability increase year over year. All right. So let's hop into these slides here. On the left, I've got a slide here of Salesforce. And I don't know if people realize this, but Salesforce has been in the news quite heavily, right? They make a lot of inorganic growth from acquisitions, but the majority of the growth up to this point has been organic, and the growth in the future is going to be organic. So take a look at this. They plan to grow the company by 2x, right? Between now and 2024. They've been growing essentially at 2x, right? Just look at that chart. It's pretty incredible. And it's not because they're pushing out new products, okay? They're generally speaking growing their existing customer base. And we'll talk more about that in a second, all right? And Microsoft, people could think this kind of revenue target's a little low on the right there, 44 billion. Microsoft's total revenue is 143 billion currently in 2020. This specific view is just the cloud play, okay? Just showing you the drastic increase in cloud spend, okay? And what's important to understand is both of these companies have sales teams that have targets on your existing contracts of a 10% year-over-year increase. Saying that a different way, okay? When you go into a renewal situation with either of these suppliers, they're automatically planning on a 10% uplift, but by that next year. If your sales team doesn't get that 10% uplift, quite frankly, they're in trouble. So automatically, you're working against a situation with your sales team where they are working against you, quite frankly. If you want to right size and downshift and save money on your contracts, you're automatically at odds because your sales team is incentivized heavily to at least grow your accounts 10% year over year. And it's important to note they're really good at it, okay? And they're really good at it. And you don't need to know anything other than just look at the numbers on this slide, okay? Another important thing to understand with SaaS is that there's a very low barrier to entry as far as acquiring net new licenses typically with SaaS. If you think of the early days of Microsoft or Oracle, anything that has on-premise software, meaning you don't purchase on a per license basis, but you purchase an annual, kind of a one-time major commitment and an annual maintenance agreement year over year. That was kind of a slow growth, but kind of the early Microsoft days, right? Slow growth, slow and steady. Now with SaaS, not only is it easy to acquire new customers with a point and a click, but specifically, it's easy for the existing customers to grow their existing spend. If the client doesn't have a strong software asset management team, in other words, you don't have governance that allows, that prohibits end users from just going out and procuring new licenses. And that's one of the reasons that the divide and conquer tactic, which we'll talk about more in a second, has been so successful, specifically inside of large organizations, because honestly, the AE, the account executive, can go in and find new opportunities, push new products that almost always goes around the procurement team and a governance team. And even if it has to go through a governance process like procurement through a PO, usually procurement's brought in the 19th hour saying, yeah, we need this. We've already talked to Salesforce, get on with it. Yeah. So this is what's happened. And this is the environment we're in. And this is the reason we tripled down on our capability in Salesforce as well, because of these specific numbers. Another important thing to understand about SaaS is people would say, it's cool, Dan, no problem. Our next renewal, I don't expect much of an impact because we have price protection, right? Now, a lot of you are probably nodding your head saying, yeah, that's me. We've got price protection, our team, or I negotiated this in the past. Call it 5% uplift protection, 3%. You pick your number. What the SaaS providers have gotten really good at, okay, is defeating these legal protections that you may have negotiated with full intent to protect yourself for 5 years. But let's say you negotiated your agreement 3 years ago, 5 years ago, with a 3 to 5% protection. What SaaS providers are doing right now, like Salesforce and Microsoft, is they do a lift and shift of your licenses. What that means is they will package up what a standard license is. Let's call it a Sales Cloud Enterprise Edition license, Unlimited Edition license. And the capability is there. What you paid for, it's there. But they're going to call it something different at your next renewal, which allows them to create a new SKU. And Salesforce learned this from Microsoft, by the way. And Microsoft learned a lot of it from Oracle. But quite frankly, Microsoft and McKinsey are to blame for all of this. That's a whole nother story. They'll create a new SKU just so they can say that they have a new product with new digital capability that they're going to push into your environment, and your old product is being retired. And this is one of the tactics that SaaS suppliers are using, and quite frankly, with great success for people that don't understand how to defeat that type of environment. So we call it the lift and shift. Simply repackaging something under a new label. Capability really hasn't changed that much, but allows them to create a new SKU. Okay. It's also important to know about your sales team, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more in the next slide. But just as a preview here, what software companies figured out a long time ago is two things. One, the first year is the most critical on any contract because that's the opportunity to land and expand and to lock in as much as possible, because the change cost to get off of these contracts is high. Not just the contracts, I'm talking about the actual architecture. If you're a Microsoft shop, it's very hard to switch to Google. They know that, it's by design. If you're a Salesforce shop, it's very hard to switch to Microsoft, all by design, right? So change costs are high. That's why it's important for these software suppliers to throw as much stuff at you as possible in that first year. As a result, your sales team is heavily incentivized for your first year growth, more than 2, 3, 4, or years 5. They are focused on piling as much crap into your contract as possible, and they're incentivized heavily to do so. Okay, that has also fueled the significant growth that we see here, and is the backbone of what we call the SaaS selling machine. So I'm going to move to the next slide here. Hopefully this makes sense. There's a couple of key examples. We briefly touched on this in my overview of the SaaS machine, but let's talk about your account team right now. So the most typical title for this is an account executive. That's what Microsoft and Salesforce uses. What's important to understand here is their motivations, behaviors, okay? First year revenue is king to them, right? And so they're naturally incentivized to throw as much as possible at you from a quantity perspective, okay? It's also important to understand that these account reps are incentivized specifically to drive revenue on specific products. The easiest way to figure that out is by asking the sales team, actually, what are you most interested in helping us pursue the exploration of today, right? Or by looking at, if it's a publicly traded company, looking at the press releases for what Salesforce just acquired, what Microsoft just acquired, and figuring out, does it make sense for us to add 1 or 2 licenses of a net new product if it's going to pad the sales incentives for an account executive, whereas we can lower our costs on other products, right? So just know that your account executives' motivation are first year revenue and net new products that carry the highest sales incentive. Not all products inside of the SaaS companies are created equal. They're very, very different. Obviously, the core licenses have lower impact from the sales incentive than net new products. That's kind of a key takeaway. Also, it's important to understand that this, as I say on the slide here, this in the weeds approach quickly turns against you, because your AE's job is to identify more about your company's prospective needs than you do as the contract negotiator, negotiating on behalf of your client organization. And while the intent may be good, in which they want to help you, the negotiator, understand the total demand from your organization, it's important that you actually lead that internal analysis versus the account executive. This facilitates their divide and conquer approach, okay? So this in the weeds approach quickly turns against you if you don't properly govern it, all right? The next bullet point here in this tactical versus strategic selling. The reason, further building upon what we've talked about, the reason for this massive revenue, top line revenue growth in these SaaS companies is because it is literally like a revolving door for your lower level salespeople inside of your organization. The AE is typically swapped out every 18 months. Let's call it 12 to 24 in that range. 18 is that sweet spot. It's actually by design, specifically in Salesforce. And that is to protect Salesforce against having to live up to any verbal promises that your account executive may give you, saying, I won't worry about that if you do this, right? At the end of the day, we all know this, but it's a good reminder, even for me, right? All that matters is what's on paper as far as your contractual and commercial relationship with Salesforce, Microsoft, or whomever we're referring to, right? Don't ever trust verbal deals, and don't ever trust email deals either. It has to be in the contract. In Salesforce's terms, that's an order form or a CELA. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And in Microsoft's terms, it's in a customer price sheet. All right, it has to be actually part of your contract. So they're swapped out every 18 months purely because it is literally a hunting game. They are trying to find net new revenue. If they meet their targets, great. If they don't, even worse for them, and they're out. Typical lifespan of these account executives inside of these companies is no more than 2 years. Total lifespan, okay? So they churn them out faster than an Accenture turns out, the new kids out of college pretending to be a consultant, right? Another important point here, your AE has very little authority. They will lie through their teeth indicating that they have more authority than they do, and they don't. They are simply there to be the quarterback, if you will, that runs the communications and be the single point of truth, if you will, between the supplier, Salesforce, Microsoft, et cetera, and you, the client. The reality is most of their communications to you are actually canned from previous deals and from the business desk, which we'll talk about in a second. And they don't have knowledge of what we call best-in-class rates, right, for your specific industry. This is purely by design. They change them out constantly because the account executive is able to be empathetic with you, saying, this is the best deal I've ever seen. Like, who's ever heard that comment? We've never seen a better deal than this. I've been working with this company 15, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. They have very little knowledge of what best in class is because they only have their little portfolio of customers. And then they get swapped out to different industries, which have different rates. Another important little tidbit here. The agriculture industry has very different rates by design than the healthcare industry or the manufacturing industry or the biopharma industry. Easiest way to think about that, the more money an industry makes, like a biopharma, as an example, versus ag, they're getting screwed even worse than you, as a general rule, okay? Just purely based on the value-based pricing, all right? And so it's important to understand that your rates in your industry are best in class specific to your industry versus any other. That's why I always caution people against, if you hear the term best in class and you get it from a firm like Gartner, and again, I'm not knocking Gartner for the general market intelligence that they provide. It is of value. But if you want to really know best in class rates, you have to work with someone that specifically works on these deals per industry. When your sales team is literally trained how to defeat against, when you say to them, I'm working with Gartner or whatever, and I know this is the best in class rate, they're literally trained how to defeat that. And it's that may be the blended rate, but that's not a rate for you based on your annual contract value, your annual revenue as a company, and your specific industry. Those are the three different variables. I'll repeat that again because I went over that quickly. There's three variables that will dictate your pricing for any SaaS deal. That is let's call it a well-governed SaaS company. Maybe not a startup, but a well-governed SaaS company, like a Salesforce or a Microsoft. It's your industry. It's your annual contract value, meaning how much you spend annually with the supplier. And third, it's your annual revenue, AKA how large of a company you are. And those are the three variables that SaaS suppliers use to price out your deals, okay? So be careful when you throw out this concept of best in class to these account executives, because they literally know how to defeat that by saying, well, that's not specific to you, okay? The other point to understand is the VP is hardly ever a VP. The best way I can describe this, if anyone has walked into a bank lately and you talk to the VP of finance, the VP of this, VP of it, everybody's a VP, right? Nobody, I swear to God, the SaaS companies have learned a lot from the finance organizations where like everyone gets a VP title, which completely means nothing from really a decision-making authority. So if you see RVP, or no, if you see VP, if you see RVP, which stands for Regional Vice President, if you see AVP, which stands for Area Vice President, honestly, they have very little authority even then. Okay, SVP, if you're wondering who does, right? In these companies, you need to work with an SVP, aka Senior Vice President or higher. There's an Executive Vice President. Those are the type of people we work with that actually has, let's call it, enough authority to make a major change in your account if needed. Okay, so don't get thrown back by saying you're talking to the executive leadership of Salesforce or Microsoft. I would make sure that they actually are high enough VP to make sense. And again, the easiest way of describing that is it has to be a S or an E in front of it to really even matter. Let's call it that way. Okay. I'm gonna go to the next slide here. The business desk. So sometimes this is called referred to as the renewals desk, business desk, right? Sometimes the individual will be called renewals manager, right? So you guys get the point. It's this invisible team in the background that your account executive will say, I've got to go check with my business desk. I'm sure everyone's heard that before, that has negotiated a deal, Microsoft, Salesforce, any of them, okay? Or they'll need to talk to their renewals team. What this is, it's not actually a lie. It's true. It is a sales management support team in the background that holds decision-making authority for extension and low-risk renewals, okay? The objective of this team, it's actually a brilliantly designed system. I respect it from a business perspective. It is to have your hunters be hunters. And when there's no more hunting, AKA your account executive looking for net new business inside of the company, if there's no new hunting available, hand it off to a support team that's incentivized differently, okay? And so that's what this is. This team is designed to support you, support your sales team that's negotiating with you to make this as hands-off process as possible, especially if there's no net new products to be purchased in your contract. So it's also important to understand, though, that these guys actually develop and approve decisions related to rates for the most part. Okay, there's some common exceptions here, but they actually are the decision maker for much of the rate-related discussions. And they're, by design, they're not supposed to officially interface with you, customer. It's important that you do interface with them, though, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Okay, but it's important to understand that this team is literally designed to be the man on the hill, if you will, kind of watching over all of the different sales reps and all the different accounts, looking over the revenue recognition each year. These guys are there to drive not only consistent revenue, but essentially drive an easy process for your account executives so that they can be in 15 different places. And some of these guys actually, just for your understanding, they actually write the messages. This is why we know the playbooks of Salesforce so well. They have 4 playbooks. We can literally tell what message the account executive is going to send next because it'll be a canned message. One of the funniest things, just quick little side note, and if you guys see this, you should tell me too. One of the funniest things when you're going through a contract negotiation is a lot of these companies use like Google, like Salesforce is one of the original Gmail suite users. And Gmail just sucks with, it's awful with formatting, right? We all understand this. And so what's great about it is literally you can see the formatting be different in one part of the message versus the second part of the message. If you get a message from your AE at Salesforce, and that way you know it's literally just a copy and paste from the business desk team in the background that says, this is what you say to them next, right? And so this is literally how they operate. They are there to essentially feed the sales rep information and specific data to drive the renewals process as efficient as possible. Now, if you can engage the business desk and the renewals team by simply asking and requiring their involvement on your negotiation team. Okay. So before I was talking about kind of what they do, their role, et cetera, they're a critical player here, right? It's also important to understand that typically these guys are not trained negotiators. Okay. And so it's important to understand that this team, if they're actually talk to customers, which by the way, they love doing because they're hardly ever allowed to, okay? If they talk to customers, in general, these representatives will actually tell you more truth and more about what's going on in the sales incentives that Salesforce or Microsoft has than your actual sales executive, okay? Because again, they're not trained to, withhold information as if, and play the game, if you will, like your account executive, right? Two different roles, one supporting. However, you need to get to the business desk and your renewals manager, your renewals team, and have them part of your negotiation. The easiest way of doing that, again, I don't want to overcomplicate this, is asking and requiring them to be involved in your negotiation team, right? So when you're kicking off a negotiation with your SaaS supplier, ask very deliberately who is all involved in this process, both in the front and behind the scenes at the supplier. And if you're dealing with a Salesforce, Microsoft, Oracle, all these companies have at least one individual, usually two or three for large enterprise customers that sit in the business desk that are supporting your account executive. So make sure they're at the table with you because you'll get more information out of them than you will ever your sales team. If that makes sense, okay? I'm gonna go to the next slide here. So we talked about this a little bit already. Divide and conquer tactics continue to be the most effective sales tactic in use today. It's simple, it's easy, and it works. The larger the organization, the more effective the tactic, AKA the more people you have, the more mouths that can talk, the more effective it is for your sales team to figure out what's really going on inside of your organization. People ask me and our team all the time, how do you best defeat the divide and conquer tactic? The best way to defeat it is planning and alignment, right? You might have already heard this term, 80% of negotiation is planning. I actually argue it's closer to 90%, quite frankly, especially when you're dealing with robotic sales organizations like Salesforce, where they literally have 4 playbooks and we can just choose which one they're going to play from and we know what their move is next, right? So honestly, for us, we say it's more like 90%. Getting a clear alignment inside of your organization of who in your company is talking to Salesforce right now, for whatever reason. It could be operational break fix from a run standpoint. It could be your IT business partners looking to build new solutions, new capabilities. It could be your CEO, CFO, CIO, finance. Create a stakeholder map, okay? And figure out who all has touch points with Salesforce. I will tell you this right now, specifically with Salesforce, for all those customers that have it, but this is also the important thing for Microsoft. But your Salesforce admin, AKA the IT individuals that are in charge of making sure the platform doesn't break, all right? And in charge of user provisioning inside of the organization. That by far is always the weakest link for companies. When you have a Salesforce admin that is in direct communication with Salesforce, it's fine from a break fix perspective, but your sales team will use that individual, if not properly trained, as a Trojan horse. They will find out who they go talk to, who's asking them for information so that they can land and expand. It's also important to note that this divide and conquer tactic is usually used about 6 months, 6 months up to the renewal date of your contract. This is really what we're talking about, the contract negotiation phase. Let's call it 6 months before your renewal is where the calendar starts for these SaaS suppliers, okay? And really 3 months before the contract renewal date is when the playbook starts, specifically those 4 playbooks I was talking about, all right? And so organizational planning and alignment is how you defeat this. Gain your stakeholder map, inform them of what's going on, make sure that everyone understands what their role is in the negotiation, okay? I made a mistake personally years ago, and sometimes I still find myself making this mistake, albeit not as much now, but I was, when I was an employee, let's call it, of certain companies. I used to tell the C-suite to shut up. I used to tell them to shut their mouths, don't talk to the suppliers, we've got it from here, type of thing, right? The procurement guy. I found out very quickly that that is a losing proposition. C-suite people are designed to talk. It's all they do. They don't actually do a lot of work anymore from a typical knowledge worker perspective. They're there to give guidance, counseling, advice, make decisions, but they talk, right? So, and your sales team knows this. And so what they'll do is they'll match up one of their sales leadership, right? The VP, like we talked about before, or the SVP, sometimes in special situations, will reach out to your C-suite and have a executive to executive level peer-to-peer conversation. Well, they know that your executive team is ultimately who holds the budget, 1, 2, makes ultimate decisions, and 3, is not, more than likely, not talking to the people that are actually negotiating the contracts at a tactical level. So those peer-to-peer conversations are intended to drive information campaigns specific to your executives, to your middle management, and to your lower level. It's specifically designed to extract information and push information into the heads of your C-suite to, again, grow your account as much as possible. So create a communication plan campaign that engages everyone internally. Like I said, I made a mistake before telling C-suite people not to talk. That's actually a mistake. What I found very clearly is, especially CIOs, they actually like getting involved in negotiations as long as they understand there's a plan and where they fit in. So develop a communication strategy that engages every level of your organization, from the top, middle, and the bottom, right? And have them be part of it. Not all at once. We can talk more about that individually based on your scenario later. But the point is get them involved, right? Have them be involved. Now, another important point here on the bottom is, people ask us, how did you guys get so good at this? And people commonly ask me if my intelligence community background has helped me in my role. I can honestly say it has. And I was given a lot of good guidance early on that, a procurement type function would be a good transition out of a law enforcement type of environment based on empathetic skills, negotiation skills, et cetera. But one of the important things to understand is you can develop your own counterintelligence tactics, specifically in your negotiation team. What I mean by this is, remember this communication plan I was talking about, developing this strategic communication for your C-level, your mid-level, and your end users, if you will. Make them all part of the team. Give them an understanding of what your objectives are. But then throughout different phases, and we recommend 4 phases of communication, starting 6 to 3 months before your renewal, all the way to renewal. There should be 4 different phases of communication, okay? We recommend intentionally giving your different levels different talking points that shows misalignment, but isn't actual misalignment, if that makes sense, right? One of the key phrases we all hear every day that people that have been doing this for a while is speaking from one voice. Yes, that's an important topic, and you should do that at the end, but not necessarily at the beginning. What's important to understand is you can learn more about what Salesforce wants, what Microsoft wants, what all these guys want out of this negotiation by allowing the divide and conquer tactic to take place, as long as those individuals are informed, your internal individuals are informed of what information they should extract from the sales representative to figure out where they are trying to go with your deal. That allows you to create a negotiation plan that serves their interests. It's not a manipulative way of doing it. It's simply a way to be aligned on identifying interests and identifying common interests, right? So that is in its most simplest form is a counterintelligence plan, how to leverage the tactic against your SaaS suppliers, okay? So I'm gonna go to the next slide here. Timing matters. It's pretty common knowledge that every publicly traded company, has a fiscal year, and privately too, but as a fiscal year, and at the end of the fiscal year, there are large sales incentives given to your sales reps to drive the most net new revenue possible, right? And that is all about pushing the proper messaging to the street. In the interest of our two suppliers we're talking about today, Salesforce, January 31st, right? Microsoft is June of every year, right? And it's important to understand that why don't they just end in the calendar year, December 31st? I tell you, this is one of the most brilliantly designed financial tactics ever within this space. And it is honestly, it took me a while to figure this out at the early part of my career. I'm like, why is this? And then I just realized that this is brilliant. It's to maximize revenue from two different budgets, because these SaaS suppliers know exactly how you budget, and most people follow a typical calendar year, okay? Capture two different budgets, two different fiscal year budgets. Salesforce, an example, will capture your end of year money that you're trying to spend before you lose it, especially if you work for the government, but that's a whole other story. End of year budget in the end of the year for December, and they're also going to capture your budget, your net new budget in January. See, and they can do that through many different means, which I won't go into the tactics here because it's not important. But I'm happy to answer any questions later in the Q&A or offline. But it's specifically important to know why they do it, and to leverage it. So whenever possible, try to co-term all your agreements with these big guys at the end of their fiscal year, all right? Now, people commonly ask us, is there an opportunity to trigger a renegotiation event prior to my annual renewal? And we call that, or not annual renewal, your contractual renewal. You might have a 3 to 5 year deal, right? We call this an early commit. That term is taken from Microsoft, and it's largely used in the industry. And the answer is yes. And there can be many reasons for it. One of the most common reasons that allows you to do this is specifically M&A activity. So merger and acquisition, either acquiring or divesting a company. And the best way to figure out whether or not you can do that is by referring to your contract. It'll be in your master terms and conditions. And that's actually a legally protected right. Now, on a commercially protected opportunity is specifically when you see a massive uptick in revenue on the horizon, and largely organic revenue, okay? As an example, if you're gonna push out Salesforce to a new country or a new business unit, you've got a new product launch, you've got another 200 to 1,000 licenses, that don't allow yourself to say, oh, we're just going to attach this onto the old contract, because that's exactly what your sales team will want to do. When you have a significant uptick in revenue, treat that as a renegotiation event, even if it may not seem you're able to do that contractually, okay? Do that. We can talk more about that later. Here is some opportunities and risks for new versus existing customers. So I think it's important to understand the majority of our clients are actually renewal customers. So people come to us saying, I feel like I'm getting screwed and this supplier helped me negotiate a better deal so I can reinvest this cash into growth areas of the business, right? And so, on average, we save companies between 20 and 50%, but there's opportunities and risks between new and existing. And so let's just cover a few of them first. So with new customers specifically, there are high sales incentives for new customers. Kind of obvious, right? A lot of this isn't rocket science, but it's a good reminder. Just know that if you're looking to procure a new system, right, especially a SaaS system, right, you have the greatest opportunity to negotiate the best possible deal right there and then, right? And so it's important to know that your sales team is actually incentivized 35% more on average. Again, changes depending on the supplier. 35% more on average for a new customer versus an existing customer. Okay, so use that to your advantage. Another opportunity is don't allow yourself to throw on products before you actually completed a proof of concept, right? I'm a huge fan for new and existing customers, by the way. I'm a huge fan of proof of concepts. And if you properly ask for it, negotiate it, et cetera, with your software team, suppliers, you will be able to get, quite frankly, a proof of concept for free. You should be able to do it for free. Versus what your account team will tell you is, oh, we'll just add 20 or 30 licenses on there and you guys can just start small, right? Don't do that, because you might find out that architecturally, commercially, end user wise, whatever, that just doesn't work for you. And that way you're not locked into paying for shelfware for years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however long your contract is. Okay. And like I said before, it's a really important opportunity to lock in an aggressive baseline, because remember what I said at the beginning of the presentation. All the SaaS companies are looking to increase your revenue at the end of your contract a minimum of 10%. And let me share something quickly here on the risks on this other side. Let me jump over to the risks on the existing customers. You see a negotiation baseline for SaaS is 5 to 15% above your current budget. Salesforce actually automatically increases your contract by 7% as the average every renewal. So you'll literally get your order form and you'll say, hey, what's this 7% uptick, right? If you're on online master terms conditions, which the majority of customers are, which please don't allow yourself to go on any sort of online terms conditions if you can help it. You should always memorialize it. The reason for that is that there's literally, if you read the fine print, literally the master terms and conditions, if they're online, there's going to be a term in there that says Salesforce or whatever vendor we're talking about can modify those terms and conditions at their will as long as they give you notice, right? I have to blame Microsoft for this. They're the worst, because think about how many times every week we're just hitting accept when you got these legal terms and conditions that pop up on our computer or whatever, right? It's ridiculous. Almost no one reviews it, right? And so, but this is how they've been able to get away with this, okay? So master terms and conditions, if you're a SaaS-based company, or excuse me, using a SaaS-based company, and they say online terms and conditions, try to memorialize it as much as possible. Another thing, companies like Salesforce will increase it by 7% every year, right? And they'll put that in there. And so automatically, if you remember, their target is a 10% minimum uplift every year. They've already got 7 of the 10% because 7% was added just an uplift on your existing product with no new capability. Now they just have to go find the extra 3%. So now automatically, like I said, you're working against the odds because you're trying to lower off your baseline, which was not inclusive of that 7%, right? So that's a key risk there. So lock in the most aggressive price baseline, we're talking about new customers again, as possible, because it only kind of gets worse from there, if you will, right? 80% of customers overbuy in the first year because of this notion of the greatest discount. Don't get yourself locked into that. And there's also a risk that most companies don't negotiate price protection for the renewal. Now, you might be asking yourself, now, Dan, wait a second, you just talked about price protection before. You said most companies get around this, right? Most SaaS suppliers get around this. It's true. Here's what you do to get around that tactic, okay? You do the price protection on your annual spend, not on a specific product. So don't allow your SaaS suppliers to get say, we'll lock in a 3% price increase on this specific SKU or this specific product. No. label it to a capability or to just the total annual spend, right? And so that is how you defeat a lot of surprises, specifically down the road. All right, so those are opportunities and risks for new customers. Existing customers, there's an opportunity. We have a proprietary process inside of TNG. We call it the right size and right price process. The right size is all about license rationalization. Remember what I talked about, 80% of new customers overbuy? Well, that same stat is true for existing customers, not in quantity, but in the capability of the license they're buying. Saying that a different way, the majority of your end users are not using all of the capability available to your license that you're paying for. The most common example, we'll just use Salesforce as an example. The most common example is the Salesforce Unlimited Edition Sales Cloud license, right? Vast majority of customers don't even realize what's all inclusive of it. They got it because their sales team told them they needed it, right? And so you need to rationalize your licenses. Be very careful about your actually right sizing based on what you need, both architecturally and commercially. One of the other parts of our secret sauce here, but anyone can do it, is developing personas. You need to identify personas and how your groups, and persona is essentially a type of individual, an avatar, if you will, inside of your company, how they use the tool. And generally speaking, you're going to have anywhere between 1 to 8 personas. And we tell people, don't create more than 5. It gets too complicated. But create 1 to 5 personas on how your end users are using the platform. And then license accordingly, right? And then the right price is, quite frankly, the easy part for us, but it's why most companies come to us to try to figure out if they're getting screwed or not. But work with a firm that knows how to benchmark your prices specific to your industry, your annual spend, and your annual contract value. So just make sure you know what you should be paying. And create a 3 to 5 year roadmap. Remember we were talking about the alignment piece? This is one of your best tool sets to defeat divide and conquer tactics, as well as, quite frankly, just align your own internal organization before you even talk to Salesforce or Microsoft. Develop a roadmap of what you think you need over the next 3 to 5 years. It's extremely important. Another piece here is you need to own the documents. We're going to talk about it in the next slide quickly, but own the documents that you share with your SaaS supplier. Don't allow yourself to get into the PDF sharing game of here's your net price, we'll decrease it by 5%, but you don't actually have line item visibility on your products. Don't allow yourself to get into that. The big guys love doing this because they get to hide their margins, specifically the sales team. They get to hide their margins based on looking at net spend versus individual line item spend, okay? And the other risk here is the change cost is high, right? Especially if you have any custom development inside of your platforms. These suppliers know that your change cost is high. And quite frankly, they walk into almost every negotiation knowing that they have the upper hand against you here, specifically in software, okay? Go to the next slide here. We just talked about this, just quickly, let's talk about it a little bit more. Sales teams love to develop this kind of one-pager, right? And why that might be nice if you're an executive to say, what's my cost? If you're the negotiation team, you want to figure out how your costs are moving up and down on a SKU basis, okay? You have to, they're intentionally hard to understand, okay? You have to own the document, develop an Excel spreadsheet. We have a template, actually, that you can use. You can contact us for here, which is essentially just a roadmap template. Develop that roadmap and use that document and enforce Salesforce or Microsoft to use your documents because, as I always describe to people, Microsoft doesn't lie, but PowerPoint does, okay? Or excuse me, Microsoft Excel doesn't lie, but PowerPoint can, right? As far as equations inside the Excel document. So there are high sales commissions for land grabs. And what I mean by that is anytime you're an existing customer that has a new business unit, new country, whatever, that specific SaaS supplier, Salesforce or Microsoft, hasn't already penetrated inside of your company, you need to understand that that's a high value for your sales team, right? You're only going to figure that out if you have line item based pricing, right? Now, remember the playbook process we talked about. All of the big SaaS providers do this, okay? They all have playbooks and they all live to them. Part of our secret sauce here at TNG is knowing exactly what offer is actually real or not. The best thing I can tell you is the best and final, which you'll always hear in offer 2, if not offer number 1. This is our best and final offer. It's always BS, okay? It doesn't apply until you're at offer number 4, maybe even offer number 6, depending on your situation. For Salesforce, it's offer number 4 specifically. Okay, it's a very robotic process. So know that. You're not looking at your real offer until you get offer number 4. The next point is specifically a SaaS enterprise license agreement. So in the poll questions, we asked, how many people are familiar with a SELA? That's a Salesforce version. So the Salesforce enterprise license agreement. A enterprise license agreement with any software company versus an a la carte approach, meaning you pay for essentially a unlimited use of a bucket of products or services for a set amount of price. It needs to be very carefully considered, challenged, and compared to other options, okay? To give you perspective on this, we've had only one client out of hundreds where a SELA has made sense for a company working with Salesforce, as an example. And we work with some of the largest companies in the world, okay? And so, quite frankly, we actually take them off of a SEAL. We take them off of an enterprise license agreement and put them on an a la carte approach via MSA and order forms. And typically, that saves about 41.3% to be exact, when you switch from an enterprise license agreement to an a la carte approach. So just know that in any deal you get involved with, make sure you're comparing multiple options. A SEAL agreement, again, most companies in enterprise license agreements are contacting firms like TNG to say, am I really getting the value? Because I don't know, because it's just one price, right? So be very careful before you engage yourself in the specific SEAL agreement, okay? And then we talked about the final point already. Manage and own your own negotiation documents. Let me go to the next slide here. I want to make sure we get to some questions. So I want to get to our key takeaways here. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Just know that the SaaS sales machine, is a brilliantly designed system. I actually have a lot of respect for it from a business perspective. The tactics and the execution by the sales teams are often very, very slimy and quite frankly, can range on the edge of unethical. And I can share a lot of war stories about that later if you're interested. But it leverages timing, stakeholder misalignment, and multi-year budgets. So you have to prepare yourself to gain the most leverage as possible. Preparation is 80% of negotiation. Again, like I said before, in certain SaaS suppliers like Salesforce is actually more like 90%, right? Start 6 months in advance. Only once have I actually met a company that can actually start 6 months in advance. Almost everyone else is usually firefighting. So when you're in your big SaaS deals, make sure you start 6 months in advance. Just from a preparation standpoint, it's not heavy lifting, but that's our target when we enter into companies. Get everybody aligned 6 months in advance, thinking that the negotiation is really going to start probably in 4 to 3 months in advance of the actual renewal, right? Right size yourself. Protect yourself against being over licensed, either in quantity or capability. A specific topic on this quantity piece. We already talked about capability, right? This quantity piece. One of the oldest tricks in the book, you'll hear it from all these SaaS companies, is they have pricing thresholds. It's absolute nonsense. You have to buy 1,000 licenses to get to this specific price. You've got to buy 2,000 licenses. Nonsense. Yet most people understand it and accept it, but don't allow yourself to buy shelfware. That's what we call it. AKA licenses you're not using just to get the lower price. Extremely rarely, sometimes it makes sense to buy individual products that have high sales incentives tied to them, like we talked about before, if it's actually going to lower your net TCO. But don't allow yourself to buy a shelfware. It's actually against our religion here at TNG. And right pricing, understand your price targets. This is kind of obvious, but make sure you know what the hell you're trying to shoot for before you shoot at anything, okay? Develop a forward-looking roadmap. This is just not only just a good practice in negotiation, but a good practice internally. It's incredibly efficient to use a document to say, if you have multiple business units inside of a large enterprise, what specific needs does a specific business unit have? And break that out on the roadmap. So you've got a holistic view across the enterprise, but you can break it down by individual business unit. It's going to prove extremely useful even after the negotiation ends from a license compliance and governance perspective. Create a negotiation plan, clear roles and responsibilities. We obviously have some templates around this. Again, remember what I said about the divide and conquer tactics. You need to be prepared for that. Leverage a game to capture the greatest value for your organization. Just understand that there's no way to defeat the playbooks of saying, don't worry about the 4 offers, just give me your best offer in offer number 1. I can't tell you how many clients we've had come to us and say, Dan, I heard you about the 4 offers in one of your presentations. I went and asked for it, and they're not buying it. So it's important to understand you can't defeat this game. So just play it. Just understand how you have to play it to get the best value, okay? The last piece is something we didn't talk a heck of a lot about in this specific presentation. I can answer some questions on it, but carefully examine your terms and conditions, even if they may appear standard. I say especially in order forms in this presentation, because that's specifically for Salesforce. It's equivalent for Microsoft. Let's talk about Salesforce for a second, though. Salesforce will come to you and say, we don't change our terms for anyone. It is what it is, right? We've never done it. I've never seen it in my history, blah, 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 blah. All nonsense. Now, the only little bit of truth of that is that the master service agreements, AKA, the parent agreement, where all of your individual order forms and everything else falls under, that typically is the most standard document there is. And honestly, the reason that these SaaS suppliers don't like changing them very often is because they're lazy and the legal teams have to keep track of who has special terms and not. So what they do is they put the special terms in the order forms. So you can always negotiate your special terms at the order form level, AKA where all the pricing is, okay? And so I can take more questions on that as an example, but before I leave you off this presentation, let me just say one of the best terms, actually, I'll say 2. One of the best terms that you can negotiate as far as any SaaS deal is swap language, meaning you are able to swap around licenses if you see decreases in quantities in a certain license, but you want to try out a net new product for your marketing team. Like marketing is typically known for this. They want to go attack every little shiny new object there is out there from a product capability standpoint. They want to try it out and push it, all with good intentions. But that's like the worst case scenario from specifically a governance perspective, because now you're going to have all this shelfware that your marketing team isn't using, right? So negotiate swap language, which allows you to keep the same annual revenue with your supplier, but swap the products and services inside of it. Okay, so that's a huge win. Another huge win is make sure you include what happens in a merger and acquisition event for your SaaS suppliers. One of our clients uses this term, it prevents you from getting a ransom letter from companies like SAP and Oracle, et cetera, which again, we help negotiate companies out of, but whenever you're acquiring a company and you're moving and you're bringing them into your instance, all of a sudden you'll get a ransom letter from any of these guys that say, well, based on the new value that you are now getting out of the platform, here's your extra bill for $1.8 million per year, okay? So make sure you're very scripted in how you handle an M&A environment within your company. So that is it. We've got very popular articles. If you type anything regarding Salesforce negotiation into Google, you'll find this article in the top left here, understanding how Salesforce negotiates. Again, we became the leader in Salesforce. That's why I talk about Salesforce so much. But a lot of these tools and templates will help you as well. So with that, I am going to hop over to Q&A. I'm going to take a quick drink of water and hop in here. So first question. The presentation has been focused on standard SaaS pricing by industry spend revenue. What are your thoughts on value-based pricing? How about a shared risk reward pricing model? Oh, absolutely. Actually, I would say that you should be focused on that, not just in your software deals, but specifically your professional service deals, right? Make it outcomes-based versus simply paying by the drink, right? That's especially important whenever you have a software vendor that you have API spend. So you've got a lot of APIs out there. You've got basically you pay per API, you pay per the drink. Those costs can skyrocket on you very quickly. So that's one of the ways which we can you can actually push this concept of value-based pricing. You can simply say instead of paying by API connection, you're paying based on net revenue increase for your company, right? So those are different things that you can negotiate. Does TNG have experience negotiating contract with SaaS VoIP suppliers? Absolutely. How do we get a copy of the roadmap template you mentioned? One of the best ways to do that is you can actually click here on this presentation, or easily to just send me an email and my team will pick it up. My email address is right here, dan@thenegotiator.guru, and we'll be happy to share any templates that we have. We also have a unique website link that we will provide everyone that watched the show today here, where it provides some of our tools and templates, and also some other offers by specifically being a member of the conference. So, a few other questions. I'm going to grab a quick drink of water, guys. 1 second. Okay, good question. What renegotiation trends or opportunities are you seeing, if any, by SaaS customers as a result of COVID? What strategies are you seeing best-in-class enterprise deploy to mitigate high change cost risk when it comes to negotiation? Yeah, okay, all right. So the first question is COVID. So it's a great question. First and foremost thing to look at is whether you have a term in your master service agreement called force majeure. Okay, force majeure allows any acts of God to not be the liability of you. Okay, I won't go into the legal tactics of it. I'm kind of half lawyer, if you will. But long story short, that is a term that you should look for. And if you have it, and if you've unfortunately seen a reduction in your business from an employee count or otherwise, you can actually negotiate yourself out of your existing spend commitments with that contractual language. If you don't have that language in your contract, you still can do it, but it has to be handled via a careful negotiation with Salesforce, Microsoft, and others. I will say that I am seeing companies like Salesforce provide some relief in certain industries, specifically industries that are being hit the hardest, which are essentially consumer-based and the travel industry, okay, and retail. They are providing some relief there. And I personally think it's more to navigate around a potential PR hit than anything, okay? So that's that we are seeing some companies get relief there. If you actually negotiate it, it has to be very carefully negotiated. And again, we're happy to discuss it. The next question is how to mitigate high change cost risk when it comes to negotiation. It's important to understand that your suppliers understand the cost of change, like I said before. It's also important to understand that it's not smart to lie to your suppliers, right? And I want to provide more examples here. It's totally fine to say we are reevaluating the marketplace, exploring competition, et cetera. But it is not our policy ever to lie to a supplier saying, if you don't save me 20%, I'm moving to Microsoft, as an example. It's just important to understand, actually shift the topic a little bit to say, what's in it for both of us? What is actually the ultimate outcome? How can we actually develop a white paper as a result of the investments that Salesforce or Microsoft are making in my company, right? That's how you actually gain more leverage than simply saying, yes, there's high cost of change. I recognize it, but we're going to do it anyway because we're pissed off at you, right? Actually, it's much better to elevate. If you're a large enterprise customer, which is what where this question is originating, it's much better to engage the C-suite to the C-suite. And there's some specific examples right now in the ag industry that we've helped with, and other companies have done themselves, where you see specific collaborations in a very public way between the ag company and the SaaS supplier, ultimately trying to drive towards a certain outcome or vision or step change in the right direction, right? And so that's the best strategy where you don't have to lie, but you essentially flip the table towards something positive versus negative. What are the largest opportunities with Salesforce and Microsoft contracts? Are payment terms negotiable? My sales rep said I can only pay annually, but quarterly payments would work better with my cash flow. Is that an option? Absolutely, it's an option. Depending on the specific supplier, there are easier ways to get this done versus not. I will say with Salesforce, the typical payments are annual, as well as with Microsoft, actually, since that's what this question's about. However, you can get quarterly and you can get monthly. I will say with Salesforce, if you're under $1 million in annual spend with Salesforce, it is much, much easier to get quarterly versus if you're a larger enterprise. I can explain more about it, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. I'll just say, yes, you can. It has to be prioritized on your negotiation schedule, though, because typically for large enterprises, the cash flow positive benefit of making a quarterly versus an annual payment is slim to none, especially with cash so cheap. So I wouldn't want you to use all your leverage on essentially a cash flow position versus reducing your overall TCO. But the answer is yes, you can. With Microsoft specifically, Microsoft developed a long time ago. You have to go through channel partners. You have to use a VAR, which I can talk about for hours too, about how that helps you and hurts you at the same time to actually do the paperwork. Well, they've done the same thing for actually financing. So they work with partners to specifically finance your deals if you don't want to pay annually. It's also important to note TNG has partnered with specific financial institutions, some you've heard of, some probably you haven't, to create the same sort of cash flow benefits if you're interested in using one of them. But essentially, it's just a private transaction with a bank. We're out of it, but we just have negotiated this need because, quite frankly, we're tired of the software suppliers using this as leverage against our companies, so our clients. And one of the last questions is, what specific terms should I look for in a contract, or what should I make sure isn't included? Yeah, the specific what should not be there. Let's just talk about that in the sake of time here, because we're running out of time. You should not have commitments that you're not comfortable making in the long term. All right. The reason these companies are growing so fast and so rapidly is low barrier to entry from a net new license acquisition inside of existing clients, but also because of massive commitments through things like a SELA agreement, which again, an enterprise license agreement, where the company is committing, we're going to spend $100 million with you over 5 years. Don't commit to anything unless you're absolutely sure you need it. And so that's what I would probably wrap it up there. Happy to take more questions. Contact me directly, either myself or someone from my team will connect with you with the right person. So I'll probably wrap it at that, Leslie.
All right. Thank you, Dan, for being with us today. Some really good insights and very helpful for our members. For more information about the Negotiator Guru, you can stop by their booth in the virtual expo hall, or you can visit www.thenegotiator.guru. And also be sure to check out the State of the CIO podcast. I'd like to thank our sponsor again, DXC Technology. And for everyone at the conference, next up at 1 p.m. Central, we have an OATS educational session on making sense of sensors and LoRa implementation. So hope to see you all there. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.